Welcome to BergKnifemaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to make a fillet knife. Now this particular fillet knife is made out of AEBL stainless steel. It's 100 thousandths thick material to start with, and it has very unique, one-of-a-kind scales that were made by my friend Rick Schwarz out of fish bones. So this is the finished product. This is the very first fillet knife that I've ever attempted. I started out by going out to my friend AJ at Long Island Waterjet. He had actually drawn up the profile of this fillet knife, and he was kind enough to cut a few out of some stainless steel for me. I'm always amazed at watching this Waterjet machine. It just does an awesome job. So that's the fillet knife blank. I did put some Dicam blue on the edge, and I scribed two center lines on the edge, as I always do. For this fillet knife, just like with chef's knives, I don't use a tilt table like I do on most of my projects. I just use a 90-degree table on the 2x72 grinder. I'm using a coarse grit belt. This is a 60 grit, and I'm using a push stick. So what I do is I take one or two passes just to start the grind and get it lined up with the one side of those railroad track scribed lines. The rest of the time, I'm then just moving that bevel line higher and higher and kind of merging it. The push stick is really nice because your fingers don't get burnt by the hot steel, and you keep them away from the coarse grit belt. This whole process doesn't take all that long. So that the rough grinding on one side is done, I'm going to move to the other. That push stick actually has a little angle on the end, and that's basically the angle that this knife is going to be beveled to. So it's going to be a nice flat bevel. And I just pull it side to side, a little bit of pressure. Now this 60 grit belt leaves some fairly deep grind lines. The next step is going to be to get rid of those. So now I'm going to flip from horizontal to vertical. I'm going to use a handled magnet, and I found this on Amazon. I'm going to change the grit of the belt, so this belt is now an 80 grit belt. And this particular design of a fillet knife has a little guard that sticks out, that protrudes past the edge of the blade. You really want to stay away from that because that would get to be razor sharp, before the blade did. So I'm at a slight angle, and my goal here is to get rid of all of the coarser horizontal grind lines from the 60 grit belt. And once again, it really doesn't take all that long. You do also, when you're done getting rid of the grind lines, you do also want to make sure that the handle area is completely flat. And I just do this on a flat platen. My flat platen does have a glass, or it's a glass covering to it, so it is nice and flat. And that just assures that the handle material will fit properly when mounting it to the blank. Anyway, these are the blanks that are rough ground, ready for heat treating. So they're ground down to 80 grit. With stainless steel, you need a heat treating oven, and this is stainless steel tool wrap. So you make as airtight a envelope as possible. You double fold all of the edges and you crease them with a heavy object. I just use a hammer, and you do that all the way around the entire envelope. The goal here is to keep out as much oxygen as possible and therefore end up with less slag on the blade. The oven for AEBL temps up to 1960 degrees. There's about a 15-minute hold time. And then what's really nice about stainless steel and heat treating in this manner is that you don't quench in oil, you plate quench. And that's really works out well, especially with this thin material, because it helps keep that material completely flat while it's cooling. So I clamp between two aluminum channels. Some people use solid material. I like to use the channels just because I can blow air through the middle and kind of cool it a little bit faster. I'm blowing compressed air in between each of those channels and also inside. And I'm holding my left hand up because you'll feel when you get a hot spot, and then you can just spend a little bit more time blowing air over that hot spot, with the goal being to cool it as quickly as possible. After it gets down to room temperature, I did put these in between blocks of dry ice for a sub-zero quench, and then they go into a kitchen oven, 395 degrees for 2 hours, 2 cycles to temper it, make it less brittle. So now this is cleaning up the post-heat treat blade. I'm going to go back onto the 2x72 flat platen, again with that handled magnet. I am going to start right where I left off on the 80 just to quickly clean it up. And then I'll run through a variety of different belts. So I'll go to a 120, a 240, a 600. I went to 1,000. I think it was a 1,500, and then a 2,000. I wanted to see if I could get it up to a mirror finish, and you can. It's fairly easy to get up to a mirror finish. You just have to, run through the belts. Every single belt, I made sure that handle area was completely flat, and the entire time I'm cooling it, every few seconds in a bucket of water. You don't want it to get real hot after it's been heat treated. You don't want it to lose that temper. And I am staying away from the guard area as much as possible. So this is the mirror finished. Like I said, it's fairly easy, a little time consuming, but fairly easy to get it to that point, but I decided against it for a working knife. Now, in the meantime, my friend Rick Shores called me and told me that there had been a huge amount of bunker that died and washed up on a local beach. The birds and the sun left just bones after a couple of days, and he harvested some of those bones. So he thought it'd be a really cool idea to cast those bones into knife handles. He works with making turned wooden bowls, and he does a lot of aluminite work. So he actually cast these bones into knife scales for me. A nice clear casting, no bubbles in them. This is done with aluminite and a pressure pot. The only thing I really had to do was figure out what kind of backing, what color backing would look good that would highlight those bones. I went with a blue. I added a blue liner, and then in the epoxy that I glued this onto the liner, I also added some additional, blue coloring. I mount my scales one scale at a time. I use a backing board to drill through the blank as my drill guide. In this case, I'm going to use 4 1/8 stainless steel pins rather than the big 1/4-inch pins that I normally use, because they would chop those fish bones in half. After I got both sides glued in place and the pins in place, I went back to the 2x72 grinder and I just profiled the handles with a coarse grit belt. This is a 36 grit belt. Anything less really gums up pretty quickly. You can get that inside curvature by letting the belt overhang the right side of the platen a little bit, and then you can just work that curve. Now I actually round over that upper edge to the handle. I do as much work as I can on the 2x72. It just saves a little bit of time. And then I'll smooth everything out, and I'll go through a variety of different grits on an oscillating sander. I'm very careful not to touch the blade to the belt, because you could very easily ruin a knife at this point. I'm also using a small wheel attachment. Just gets into that inside curve a little bit nicer, and then you just run through whatever amount of belts you want to get to the finish that you want. For the inside on this one, I think I went to a 240. So with this aluminite material, I used the oscillating sander, and I started with think it was 320, and I went to 400, 600, 1,000, and 2,000. And once you get to that 1,000, you can really start to see how those fish bones are really going to come out. I did hand sand in between each grit, and then I polished or buffed on a buffing wheel with a little bit of compound. And then I look at it real careful, and I usually find some additional scratches, and then I'll go back a couple of grits, probably to the 600 grit, and do it a second time. Usually 2 times running through and buffing, and I get to a finish that I like. This is the finished product. So this is my first ever fillet knife. I was, pretty happy with the way it came out. I think that Rick's idea of using those fish bones just absolutely put it over the top. The blade is big. It's a big fillet knife. It's razor sharp. But really, the most dramatic feature of it is the handles. Anyway, this is the finished product. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'd like to give you an invite to join us on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. And if you're interested in making your own knives, check out the book that Jason Northgard and I put out a couple years ago called Introduction to Knife Making, and that can be found on Amazon.com. Thank you very much.